Hi, I'm Mercedes Fobb at the Capture It on Canvas studio. Welcome to Picture This. For today's painting, picture this. We have a beautiful sunset full of colors shining over the Iowa cornfield. To mark it home, I'm going to frame the piece with a silhouette of Iowa. Before we get started, we'll make sure we have everything sitting in front of us. Most importantly, on my easel, I have my 16 by 20 canvas standing horizontally. For my paintbrushes today, I'm going to be using my largest flat tip brush, my middle size angular brush, and last but not least, my tiniest brush for a tiny detail. On our palette, we're going to be using a ton of colors today. We're going to have a lot of white, green, black, and the primary colors yellow, red, and blue. And don't forget a cup of water as well as a sponge for keeping those brushes clean. To get started, I'm going to use my largest flat tip brush. And I'm going to start with the background as usual. Because I'm going to have a very colorful sunset, I'm going to be doing a lot of blending with a lot of colors. So what I like to do is prepare all of the colors first on my palette. At the top, I'm going to envision that it's going to be black. I'm going to have it fade into blue. Don't have to prepare those colors much. And then I'm going to merge into a little bit of pink. So that'll be my first color I need to mix. With that, I'm going to take a big scoop of white, plop that on my palette, and then add a little bit of red. And I'd say the white is about the size of a quarter. And just mix that in until I get the color of pink that I'd like. Okay, so there's my first color. My second color, I'm going to go into kind of a soft orange shade. So I'm going to start with my big brush, not even cleaning it because I'm going to be using the same colors. Starting with a big scoop of white. This time I want it to be at least the size of 2/4. Reason is this is going to be a lot of painting and I really want this to be the main color of my background. So I'm going to take a big scoop of yellow this time and mix that in. And I'm always trying my best to keep it in a nice little pile so I'm not hogging up all the space. But I do want to add some more red to make it more of an orange. So just a little bit does go a long ways. And mix that in. All right, I like that color. So I'm going to go ahead and wipe off that paintbrush because there is a ton of paint in there. Don't want to waste it. Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and clean my brush this time. And here we go. I am ready to start my background. So I'm just going to start from the top, work my way down, work kind of quick while these paints are wet on the canvas because that always helps with blending. So I'm going to start with black, get plenty of that on my brush, and I'm going to start with long brush strokes all the way across. Okay, so this is about as far down as I want to go. Before I get into my next color though, I do want to clean off my brush. For my next color, I'm going to be getting into the blues. So I'm going to use that large brush again, a little bit of that primary blue. And before I start the blending, I'm going to start with this paint underneath my black and go all the way across first. Kind of builds up that next color here. And I'm only going to go down about the width of my brush, maybe 2 brush strokes width, all the way across. And again, don't forget the sides. Then once you've gone all the way across, then I'm going to start overlapping that black. So I like to think of it as that brush halfway onto the blue, halfway onto the black, and going back and forth we'll start getting that nice blend between the two colors. I like to try to avoid the background looking striped. So this part's really important to keep blending, blending, blending. Alrighty, so That's all the blue I want. So I'm going to clean my brush again before I get into the pink. So with the pink, I'm going to be doing exactly the same thing to get it blended in. So with that pink, I'm going to start right underneath the blue. And again, going all the way across. And this time, I'm gonna be lazy and not clean my brush because sometimes it's fun when you get other colors coming through when you do the sunsets especially. So I'm gonna dip right into my orange now and again, do the same blending process. And occasionally in this part, I'll just dip a little bit maybe into the pink, mix that in because those colors blend so nicely. Kind of gives it more of that cloudy sunset look. You can do that as you go or you can do it at the end. All right, then I'm gonna work quickly into my last color. I am not gonna clean my brush and I'm just gonna use that primary yellow now. And again, doing the same blending technique. Underneath the orange, all the way across. Okay, and once you're done with that, we'll clean off our brush, and that finishes our wonderful sunset background. So we're going to take a little break to let that dry. Welcome back to Picture This. I have just finished my colorful sunset. So now I'm going to get started with the cornfield. I'm going to be using my nice large flat tip brush, and I'm going to be mixing a little bit of like a dark kind of a medium olive green. So I'm going to start with a big scoop of this green color I have, green oxide. I'll plop that somewhere on my palette and I'm going to add a little bit of black to it, just to darken it a little. It's kind of more of like an army green now. So holding my brush horizontally, I'm going to flick up from the bottom of the canvas to start giving some fullness to the corn. So I'm going to start at the bottom left corner here, and I'm going to start just softly flicking up. And when I do that, I'm going to drag across the canvas and pull it away all at the same time. So it's a little bit of a multitask. And I want these to go approximately anywhere from about a third the way up to almost even a half. Don't be afraid to make it plenty tall. We got the beginning of what looks like grass, but it's actually going to turn into corn here shortly. So I'm going to start with the next color. It's kind of same deal. We're going to do a dark green. So using the same brush, I'm going to just get a fresh start here and mix some more. Taking that big scoop of green to the side, adding a little bit more black this time, I guess. Making it a little bit darker. And if you haven't noticed already, this color is very see-through. So what I like to do to make it less see-through is add just a little bit of white. That always helps. Because now it's kind of looking a little, not as vibrant. I'm going to be adding a little bit of yellow to the mix as well. Okay, so that is the color I'm going to go with. Kind of a nice hunter green, a little bit darker than before. And again, I'm going to be using the width of my brush. Now this is kind of a fun part. It's letting the brush kind of do the work for you. Sometimes it doesn't work, so you can always go through and draw out every one of the leaves. But for me, I like to start at the bottom, holding my brush horizontally, and as I come up, I'm going to rotate it vertically. That way I get that nice little tip at the end of each of the leaves for my corn. So I'm going to start with maybe a couple over here on this left side, and then I'll just slowly work my way over. So with the width of my brush, I'm going to start at the bottom. Nice amount of pressure here too, making it a little bit wider. And I'm going to kind of pull it up until I get to where I want that height to be. And actually this one I'm going to make folded. I'm going to do the folded one first. So again, I'm going to do that kind of what I described there, holding it horizontally, and then as I move sideways, it comes to a nice little point. So I'm going to do that again, but maybe going the opposite direction at the bottom. Nice amount of pressure, making a nice wide leaf here. You don't have to worry too much about clean edges because I do outline this one later. So holding it horizontally again, coming to the side, and even rotating it a little bit so you're using the thin side of your brush to make the tip of that leaf. So now I'm going to dance in some other ones. All right, so now I'm going to do the actual corn cobs. So these are just going to be like a long football shape, basically. So I'm going to start with one over here because I definitely got some space over here. I'm going to start from the bottom, just using whatever side of the brush. It doesn't matter too much. And I'm going to draw that one side of the football and the other side. And then I'm going to color it all in solid for right now. All right, then I think I'm gonna add one kind of in the middle here, maybe angling to the left. This one could be smaller. Again, kind of like a long football shape. And right now it's starting to turn into a big green blob, but it's okay. We'll refine everything later. And over here I might add one more. And this is a good time to take a step back and look at it. Do you got a good balance? Do you want to add more of the leaves in there now? Do you want to add more corn? This is where you really can make it your own. I might just add a few more leaves in here and there. I want it to look like a nice full cornfield. And then once you're happy with it, we're going to go ahead and clean off our brush. Now we're going to bring a little bit more depth to it. We're going to mix in kind of like a lime green to add highlights, and we're also going to just do a little bit of low lights. But for this, I'm going to move to my middle size like angular brush. It's about 1/4 inch. And I'm going to mix more of like a lime apple green. So with this green, you know what, I'm just going to mix right on top. It's just going to take a lot of yellow. Mix that in. And because again, it's a see-through color, I really want this to pop, I'm going to add a little bit of white. And there we go. So with this brush, I like to use the thin side of the brush to get those nice thin lines for the highlights on the top side of each of the leaves and even the corn cobs. And because of the angle, I always lead with the short side. So with this, I'm just gonna go through each of the leaves and just do a quick swipe on the top edge. Swipe. Okay, so now I'm going to do the corn cobs. So for these, there's a couple ways that the corn could be exposed. I like to expose the corn because it looks, then you know for sure it's corn. So what I'm gonna do here is for this one, I'm just gonna have like a little opening through the middle. So I'm gonna start in the center top And then I'm going to smile down and come down to the very end here. And then in the middle, I'm just going to add another line. So now you can see where the opening would be for that corn. And then again, adding some highlights to the top side. Sometimes it's nice to add a couple little lines because these leaves are really textured. This one I'm going to do exactly the same way, just like a nice narrow football in the middle. And then again, adding some highlights to the top, maybe on the other side there. And this one I'm going to do a little different. I just want it to be shown right up at the top. So these leaves I'm just going to make kind of like a V, but then it's going to continue all the way down with a nice curve. And then up at the top, the other side, kind of like a long Y, I guess. And just add a little bit of highlight on the one side. And a little bit at the tip. It's a good time to take a step back and look at it. And I'm just going to do one more thing. I'm going to make an even darker green than before. So with green and a lot more black, I'm going to just make a couple low lights. So with that really dark green, I'm going to go to the bottom side now of each part of those leaves. All right. And before we go on to our next step, we're going to let that paint dry, so we'll take a little break. Welcome back to Picture This. Now that I have built in a little bit of my corn, I'm going to refine it a little bit more with a little bit of outlining. So with this, I like using my angular brush, but sometimes I do like using the smallest brush as well. I kind of alternate, so you can give it a try. But I'm going to start with some black first and actually watering it down. So I like to take some black to the side, not too much, and then I like to take that brush, dip it in my cup of water, and carry that water into the black and mix it in. This just makes the paint a little bit more fluid, making those outlines a lot easier to do. But we're going to use a little bit of black then on our brush and start outlining. I'm going to start with the corn cobs, just light pressure, using that thin side of my brush to start outlining. Now this can be some people's least favorite part. Some it may be their favorite. What I always say, sometimes the quicker you move, the smoother those lines are. Okay, now the outlining is done, but there's one more thing I like to do with the black. So I'm actually going to clean this brush and go back to my largest brush. So from here, usually it's darker down here because it's getting deep into the corn. So with this brush, I'm going to just take some black, doesn't matter if it's watered down or not, but just a little bit. We're going to do some flicking up from the bottom like we did the green before, just to kind of darken it, kind of frames it in a little bit. Light pressure. And you know, I don't like to think too much about this part. I like it to be more natural. All of it should be different lengths all the way across. You don't want it to all be the same length or same height. So just a nice soft transition up into the corn. Now I'm going to clean off my brush. And I'm going to go back to that middle-sized angular brush, and I'm going to add in the actual corn. So for this, it is yellow. But I know yellow is, again, a very see-through color, so I'm going to be mixing it with some white. So I will start with a good scoop of white, plop that on my palette, and add a good scoop of yellow in there, and mix it in. Okay. And I'm going to just use quite a bit of paint on my brush this time, and just do one touch on the end of my brush. So if you want to practice on your palette, just be one little touch. So basically that would be your corn. That's all there is to it. You can go through and draw it all out, but sometimes it's just fun to let the brush do the work for us. So I'm going to go back to where that corn will be exposed here in between the leaves. So I'm just going to start and kind of brick lay them. Just kind of place them in between. Play with pressure. More pressure you apply, the bigger the corn. Alrighty, and there's our corn. So we're gonna go ahead and clean off our brush. Now, depending on if the outlining or the corn is dry for you, will depend on if you need to wait for the next part. Luckily for me, it's drying pretty quickly, so I'm gonna jump right into it. Now for me, I'm going to be using, again, that middle-sized angular brush. I'm going to be framing the piece with Iowa, the silhouette of Iowa. So this is going to be really big. It's going to be the brightest color, so it can seem intimidating. But for me, I always like to make dots and connect it. It makes it nice and simple. So it is important, check that you got your brush clean and all that color's worked out. With a little bit of white, I'm going to start with the top part of Iowa because it is a straight line. So I'm going to start with a couple dots. Now I also like to use like measurements like my hand. So if on the same canvas size, I would say it's approximately 4 fingers down from the top. I really want this to be nice and big. And on this left side, it'll also be about 4 fingers from the right, or left, I'm sorry. So just kind of a dot there. And then we can visualize this as going straight over, and I want it to be a little bit further from the right side. So maybe this time about the width of my hand and a dot. Now we're going to do our very best to draw that straight line all the way across. Now obviously you can always use a ruler, but you know what? Sometimes it's fun to wing it. So light pressure and draw it the best you can. Now sometimes I'll have to go over it again. Sometimes that paint doesn't get all the way across. And if you make this a little bit thicker of a line too, I like that because then it really pops on that background. Okay, the scariest part is over. Now we're going to go ahead and create the back of Iowa and the nose actually. So it does have a little bit of an angle and it's a very shaky line. So this is really nice. If you have that shaky hand, use it to your advantage here. So down here, I'm going to come approximately the width of my hand up from the bottom. And I do want to make sure that it's angled in a little bit. So I would say it's about 1/4 the way across my canvas. So in half and half again. Somewhere in there, I'm going to make a dot. And from here, I'm going to make that shaky line kind of coming down. It does have a little curve out and then it goes down to that dot. So be really shaky here. And there we have it. Now we're going to do a shaky line on the other side. But as we know, we got this nice curve being the nose coming down. So let's make sure we make that dot so we know how far down we're going to go. There is this little tip of Iowa, so we're going to just make that little dot. It's actually pretty much straight down from that top there. And I would say it's a little bit lower than over here, maybe 3 to 4 fingers up from the bottom. So making that dot. And from here, it's nice to just take it slow. About halfway up, we can make one more dot, actually. I think that'll be helpful. So maybe 2 to 3 fingers in from the right, halfway up, making that dot. So now we're going to make another shaky line. Might have a little bit of a curve outward here. Might come down, and then I'm going to curve out. And then I'm going to bring it down in. and then straightening it down to that bottom right dot. And you know, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just kind of getting a second coat on there. Okay. And now I'm just going to draw this little corner here so that it's level to this dot. So it'll be up about just as high as here, this little angle here. And now to make this a little bit more unique of a piece, instead of just finishing the rest of Iowa, I like to write home across it, as I was actually born and raised here. So I'm going to just go ahead and write Iowa in cursive. Now what's always really important when writing, always remember, there's no spell check, so take your time, and running out of space is always an issue too. So luckily home is only 4 letters. I would say a nice rule of thumb is between the O and the M. That should be about halfway across. So I am going to start with my H, and I'm just going to start leveling this right here first. Then I'm going to make that tall loop for my H. And that's sometimes why I like to make my letters kind of uneven. So if you do run out of space or need to stretch space, it makes it flow and doesn't look like you are trying to squeeze it in. So then I'm going to make the top of the H, and then into the O, check your space, loop down up into my M, and then this is where I definitely check, because when the M is a little wider of a letter, so I might actually make them a little wonky. Kind of give them one side there that's taller, one side that's shorter. Making my own font out of this today. And with that white, I'm going to continue into that E. And then finish right in that little corner there. And now we have home. Okay, so before I think I'm done though, an artist always signs their work, so signing with the smallest brush is recommended. Sometimes though you can use a permanent marker, but I'm going to water down my paint a little bit, sign in the lower corner as I usually do. And there you have it. Thank you for following along with me, Mercedes Fobb at the Capture on Canvas studio. We'll see you next time on Picture This.